Julie Ditta, President of the Whitby Historical Society. Welcome to the Lynde House Museum, home of Clarissa Lynde's Heritage Kitchen Garden. Our Heritage Garden contains a selection of vegetables, herbs, berries, fruits, and ornamental flowers, which would commonly have been grown by the Lynde family and their neighbors in the Victorian era. Today we'll be taking a tour of the garden to learn the purpose, uses, and benefits of the plants growing here. We're nearing the end of the summer, so there's lots to see. Gardening is a fun and relaxing hobby. In 19th century Canada, however, the kitchen garden was where you found over 80% of your food, as well as your medicine, fragrances, dyes, and even cleaning products. These important gardens were normally planted just outside the kitchen, where the women of the house could easily get their hands on what they needed throughout the day. The gardens were often completely enclosed by fencing to keep out small animals. While we are annoyed by the squirrels and raccoons occasionally nibbling on ears of corn in our museum garden today, such a loss could be detrimental to a family depending on their garden to provide food throughout the year. Kitchen gardens were usually designed in geometric patterns surrounded by walking paths, which put all the plants within quick and easy reach of busy women cooking for their families. Our garden is planted in 7 separate rectangular plots, in addition to the fruit trees growing along the fence. When approaching the garden, the first plant you'll notice is the lavender growing in front of the 3 plots. This beautifully scented perennial is known as a cosmetic herb and was often used to create skin lotions and perfumes. Queen Victoria loved the scent of lavenders and helped to increase its popularity as she spoke of it often. Lavender also had many practical uses. Because of its fresh smell, it was often used to wash walls and clean furniture. It worked well at repelling insects from stored clothing and linens, an important purpose in a time when garments were made of natural fibers. Lavender oil was a popular Victorian treatment for head lice, as well as an antiseptic, and was therefore considered an important staple for any household. Plot 1 may not look too interesting, but that's because everything is growing underground. One of the most important staple foods of any Victorian kitchen garden is potatoes. They store well in the cold cellar, lasting throughout our long, snowy Canadian winters. And there's so many ways we can use them. For special occasions, the Lyndes may have served potato cutlets. These were boiled potatoes cut into thick slices, dipped in clarified drippings, coated in breadcrumbs, seasoned with salt and pepper, and then baked in a hot oven until browned. Delicious. Potatoes were actually a recent addition to Canadian kitchen gardens in the mid-19th century, introduced when new settlers migrated here from Ireland. The Warren brothers, William and John, who came to Whitby from Cork and married the 2 eldest Lynde daughters, would surely have been happy to enjoy a taste of home at family dinners. A new addition to the kitchen garden this year is horseradish. The long roots of this plant can be used as a strongly flavored garnish for potatoes as well as for beets, peas, and roast beef. It's high in vitamin C, potassium, calcium, and other nutrients, and is naturally antibacterial, so it could help to keep the family healthy as well. In plot 2, we have cabbage and cucumber. Cabbage stored well, lasting through the winter, and providing the base to many hearty soups and stews. Pickling helped cabbage to last even longer, and pickled cabbage was a popular side dish and garnish at many Victorian meals. The best-selling 18th century cookbook author, Hannah Glass, wrote a detailed recipe that involved hollowing the center of a cabbage, stewing it, and then stuffing it with a ragout of beans, carrots, and turnips. The sauce included wine, ketchup, pickled mushrooms, and butter. Doesn't that sound interesting? We've had an incredible year for cucumber in the kitchen garden. They've grown so large. The most well-known use for cucumbers in Victorian times has to be the cucumber sandwich. With a rise in popularity of tea parties, these elegant sandwiches became an afternoon favorite. We don't often think of cooking them today, but cucumber soup flavored with cayenne and parsley was a common recipe and was served both hot and cold. Another special treat was cucumber ice cream, which was sometimes flavored with ginger brandy. It's interesting to note that synthetic food dyes were invented in 1865, so sometimes the ice cream was tinted green. Cucumber is definitely not a common ice cream flavor today, but doesn't it sound rather refreshing? Also growing in plot 2 is calendula, a medicinal herb. It would be taken as a tea for digestive pains, and the leaves could be used as a textile dye. Its sap was used as a soothing skin ointment for healing wounds. What a wonderful plant! On the topic of herbs, let's move on to plot 3, our main herb garden. These plants were grown not just in enhancements for food, but for their medicinal value as well. In the fall, herbs could be harvested and hung to dry for use throughout the winter. Sage is considered to be the most popular culinary herb in the 19th century. It was commonly used to season pork and poultry, such as chicken and goose, and to flavor root vegetables like carrots, potatoes, and turnips. Over here are savory and thyme. Savory tastes somewhat like thyme, but with a more peppery touch. Since the Middle Ages, both of these herbs have been favorites for soups and stews. Thyme was often added to potato, meat, and fish dishes, and savory is tasty on garden vegetables. Next is marjoram. In addition to its uses as a seasoning on meat and vegetables, it was also a remedy for rheumatism, headaches, and colic. In a time when painkillers were non-existent and dentists may be scarce, marjoram also served the very important purpose of treating toothaches. Then we have mint, which has a number of uses in both cooking and medicine. It was used to soothe insect bites, to strengthen gums, and to revive people who had fainted. It was made into teas to help with gout and with stomach problems, as well as a treatment for whooping cough. Mint candy and lozenges were popular in the mid-1800s, and mint sauces were the perfect complement to roasted mutton. The Dictionary of Daily Wants, published in 1859, contains a recipe for peppermint cordial, which includes 3 pounds of sugar. Mint is definitely a very versatile herb. Today we're familiar with dusty miller as an ornamental plant, but did you know it was grown for medicinal purposes during the 19th century? Its most common use was as a treatment for headaches, but it was also thought to improve poor vision. Some people still make dusty miller eye drops as a natural treatment for cataracts, despite serious safety concerns. Dill is another culinary herb, which could often be paired with salmon. During the 1800s, Lynde Creek was well known for its abundance of fine salmon. Members of the Lynde family would stand on logs across the creek and spearfish for salmon with pitchforks, so this was surely a dish the family would enjoy. The best known use for dill, however, is probably pickling. Cucumber pickles may have been the first that came to mind when you hear the word dill, but it was used in other preserves as well. Be sure to watch our Language of Flowers video to learn another surprising use for dill. Speaking of flowers, we also grow peonies with herbs. They're neither culinary or medicinal, just a beautiful ornamental addition to the garden. Over here in plot 4 is our Three Sisters garden. The practice of Three Sisters gardening originates in the Haudenosaunee, or Iroquois people who lived in Whitby at the time the Lyndes moved here. The beans, corn, and squash represent three very different Indigenous sisters with their own unique capabilities and healing properties. They support one another in order to thrive. Their gifts are meant to benefit, sustain, and grow their community. Companion planting means interplanting crops that help each other, which is the science and ecology behind the three sisters. The height of the corn supports the bean vines, which tie the corn stalks together for added stability. Beans take nitrogen from the air and transfer it to the soil, making it an available nutrient. The large leaves of the squash plants act as a ground cover to provide shade, conserve moisture, and suppress weeds. Prickly stems also deter predators. All three of these plants stored well, which was an important consideration. This made them staples of 19th century meals for both our Indigenous peoples and the settlers. You may want to try growing one of these gardens yourself. If you do, there's a few important things to remember. Some modern corn varieties are fairly short and cannot support the bean vines, so be sure to pick one that matures to at least 6 feet in height. The variety of corn we grow is called calico or ornamental corn. Unlike the typical yellow sweet corn we're familiar with today, calico isn't sweet and it has a starchy texture when it's cooked. Ears with larger kernels are typically ground for flour or cornmeal, while those with small, pointy kernels are perfect for popcorn. By the mid-1800s, popcorn was a well-loved snack for evenings around the fireplace or at picnics and socials. Traditionally, the beans in a three-sister garden are the kind meant to be dried for later use in hearty soups and stews. Green beans for fresh eating are also an option, but just remember to choose pole beans, the kind that grow on vines, as modern bush varieties are incapable of climbing corn stalks. For squash, be sure to plant a winter variety which grows on vines that spread across the ground. Butternut, acorn, and delectica are good choices. They ripen in autumn but are called winter squash because their tough outer rind allows them to keep through the winter months. Here in plot 5, we have 2 more culinary herbs, parsley and chives. Just like today, parsley was added as a mild flavoring to many dishes. The stems of chives were used both fresh and cooked, and even the flowers were used for edible garnish. In this plot, we'll also find more easy-to-store staples of the Victorian kitchen: carrots, beets, and onions. Candied carrots made with butter and syrup and served with mint were a sweet side dish with more savory meals. Carrot soup flavored with onions and sherry was sometimes used as a starter course for elaborate dinners, but more often it was considered a quick, economical main course dish. Although popular in the 19th century, carrot pudding and carrot jam are 2 side dishes that have disappeared from modern cookbooks. Beets grew easily all across Canada and were a very versatile addition to the garden. They could be preserved for use throughout the year. Beet salad was a popular dish dating back to 18th century Quebec. It was served at many suppers across the country and consisted of a simple combination of boiled beetroot, diced and mixed with capers and tossed in olive oil. Another recipe dating from the early 1800s, when the Lyndes first arrived in Whitby, is pink pancakes. These were made from crushed boiled beets, eggs, flour, cream, sugar, nutmeg, and brandy. This recipe from the Oxford Journal called for the batter to be beaten for half an hour before frying in butter. But it isn't just the root that was used for cooking. Sautéed beet greens were also served as a side dish. The soldiers at our War of 1812 reenactment enjoyed this, along with drinking beet tea. The bright pink liquid from boiled beets is also wonderful for dyeing yarn, which we'll learn more about in another video. Onions were easy to grow and lasted a long time in cold cellars, so they were eaten with almost everything. They were roasted, fried, cooked into hearty soups and stews, baked into meat pies, and made into onion gravy. Here in plot 6, we have a flower which is more common in ornamental gardens today, but which had practical uses in the 1800s. Maybe you've tried nasturtium flowers as a salad ingredient, but did you know that the seeds were also pickled and used as a seasoning, much like capers? The leaves are high in vitamin A, C, and D, and were used to treat sore throats, coughs, and colds. Do you remember learning about mussy tussie in the Language of Flowers video? Fragrant nasturtiums were commonly added to these small bouquets to help ward off bad smells. Another plant that just looks like a pretty flower but has a lot of uses is chamomile. Combined with the equally calming effects of lavender, it was recommended as a treatment for hysteria, a popular 19th century diagnosis for many varying conditions, mostly involving women showing more emotion than was considered proper at the time. Chamomile was used as a skin wash, its soothing properties particularly recommended for baby skin. Besides the flowers, we also have peas. Peas were a staple that were served in numerous ways. Boiled peas, stewed peas, creamed peas, preserved peas, pea soup, pea porridge, pea pudding, and even peed custard. Listed in an 1859 cookbook, this recipe, simply titled Peas with Milk and Sugar, calls for the peas to be boiled with butter, crushed, then cooked in a pan with salt and pepper, sugar, and parsley until nearly dried. After that, cream and 3 egg yolks were added and cooked until thickened. Now there's something to serve at your next family potluck. And now on to our final plot, number 7. This is our pie plot, and it contains gooseberries, rhubarb, and blueberries, all perfect for making pies. Of course, they're also wonderful for jams, sauces, and many other dishes. Rhubarb is interesting as it's a vegetable mostly treated as a fruit. That was not always the case though, as it was used both ways in the 19th century. The 1822 edition of the Cook's Oracle contains an entire chapter of rhubarb recipes. These include a savory rhubarb soup with onions, carrots, and ham, and rhubarb sauce to serve over mackerel. Of course, there are sweet dishes including rhubarb pudding and the popular dish, rhubarb fool, which is a pureed fruit served with cream. When picking rhubarb, always remember to twist and pull from the base instead of cutting, as this encourages regrowth throughout the season. Did you know that gooseberries grow in a variety of colors, including shades of green, pink, red, purple, white, and yellow? Interestingly, gooseberries were used in both sweet and savory dishes as well. Remember the rhubarb sauce for mackerel? It was actually a variation of the traditional sauce, which was made with gooseberries. Our little blueberry plant is a new addition this year, so it's got a long way to grow. Both gooseberries and blueberries would be in puddings and fools as well, making them a versatile addition to the garden. Moving over to the fence, we have our fruit trees, which are grown in the espalier style. While we based some of our choices on what was common in local kitchen gardens of the time, records show that the Lyndes definitely grew espalier apple and pear trees along their fence lines. This is an ancient agricultural practice which involves pruning and tying branches to a frame, allowing the plants to grow flat against a structure such as a wall, fence, or trellis. The two-dimensional design is not only for decorative purposes, but also allows more sunlight to get to the fruit, extending their season so that they have more time to mature. Pears were made into jellies and marmalade, stewed with spices and red wine, and preserved in brandy. Apples were extremely popular in Victorian desserts. Apple pies, apple dumplings, apple sauce, and apple cake would have graced the family dinner table throughout the year. On special occasions, they may have served gâteau de pomme, which was also known as apple cheese and is a molded jelly, almost like applesauce jello. Of course, it is a given that the Lyndes enjoyed these fruits fresh off the tree as well. They would also enjoy the beautiful roses growing between the trees. They are strictly grown for ornamental purposes and would be used to decorate around the house. While they are currently out of season, these photos show how beautiful they are at their prime. Finally, over here, next to everything we've just seen, are the compost bins. Our garden team fills the bins with all the vegetable waste, cuttings, and weeds, and stirs them often to encourage everything to break down. Following sustainable gardening practices, the resulting material is added to the soil in spring to help improve the nutrients, ensuring hardy crops for years to come. We would love to give you an in-person tour of Clarissa Lynde's Heritage Garden on your next visit to the Lynde House Museum. Hope to see you soon.